New Testament better than I do. I'm sure of it. If I make a mistake, tell me. If you have something to say or to add, please do so. I mean, it's my perk for doing these classes. I mean, I'm learning. And I'll tell you, revisiting this stuff has been a lot of fun and very interesting. Housekeeping. Next time in March, it's advertised as Flannery O'Connor. If you know Flannery O'Connor, you know that she used the grotesque to get to the truth. She was a convinced Roman Catholic. She was a very religious person. All her stories and all her novels are religious, but they also go through religious experiences with the grotesque. We have an alum named Lou McCreary, class of
66,
67. Yeah, who has written several novels, and his novels are about people who were really, really sick. One of them is called The Minus Man, and it's been made into a movie. He's a serial killer, the Minus Man, and the story is told through his eyes. It's creepy, meant to be creepy. Lou's going to come talk to us about how Flannery O'Connor influenced him in the use of the grotesque. And so he and I are going to do the O'Connor one together. Now there's a change for those of you who are signed up for the whole thing. May 7th is no longer May 7th, it's May 5th. So it's the first Tuesday. And here's,
you're not Maury, you're still Peter.
You're not Maury, no, that's right. Oh yeah, yeah. Here's why, and I'll be brief. Originally it said Vietnam reconsidered and revisited. And the idea was that a dear friend of mine, my son's godfather, and I were going to go back to Vietnam and then talk to you guys about it. What happened was he retired as president of Colby College, and his faculty gave a party for him. This was last May, I think it was, in the spring. They gave a party for him, and he was presented with a big envelope, and he opened the envelope, and in it were pictures, black and white pictures of him and I. He and I? Us.
Him and me.
Him and me.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's a problem.
Right.
Yeah. I'm retired now. Of us. And you know, he said, oh, gee, how nice. And they said, we'll open the other envelope. And in the other envelope was a check for 15 grand saying, you and Peter go back to Vietnam in style this time. And so we were going to do your class about the return trip. In the meantime, President Obama asked Bro to take over the National Endowment for the Humanities, and which he did. I mean, you know, when the president says, hey, will you do this? I mean, yeah, really. I watched the Senate confirmation hearing, and it was interesting. But so he's busy, in short, and we're not going back to Vietnam, at least not right now. We'll go in wheelchairs. We're going. I didn't ask him that. He still thinks we're going. But anyway, he's coming to do a session, like an evening session like this. And so I'm not really sure what we're going to talk about. But it's on May. He couldn't come on the 7th of May, but he can come on the 5th of May, and he'll be here to talk about pretty much anything. I don't know yet. Maybe, I don't know. You know. But there's a change. So tonight, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to re-emphasize what I just said, and that's it. If you have any questions, any comments, any corrections, let me know, and let the rest of us know, please. I mean, I'm always, as I always say, I really want this to be more of a discussion than a lecture. So, but my idea is to share with you my enthusiasm for this dude, this Saul of Tarsus, and tell you why I'm enthusiastic about him and have been for many, many years. And then after I do that, I asked you to come with a verse, and I know some of you have done that, and I'd like to use the verses as a way to converse about some of what he wrote. And if you didn't do one, it's no sweat, no problem. I mean, but so let me start with a kind of 5-minute refresher on the New Testament, just in case there's someone in the room who hasn't had one in a while. It goes like this. The New Testament means covenant, and so it's the new covenant, according to the writers of this book and the believers in this book. And it consists of 4 Gospels, meaning good news, gospel, as you well know. The first 3 Gospels are called synoptic. It's a Greek word. It means similar. Remember, this is similar in vision, or it means beside one another, but it means similar in view. The first 3, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are about Jesus' teaching in his life and his resurrection, death and resurrection. Matthew and Luke take most of their stuff from Mark. Mark was probably, I'm in the camp that believes that Mark was an eyewitness. And I can argue that if you'd like. But his was the earliest. The author of Luke was also the author of the book of Acts, the Acts of the Apostles. And they were originally just one book. It was split up by, I don't know who. And I'm headed in that direction right now. The book of Acts, and then Gospel, book of Acts, and then Paul's letters, the epistles. They're not all Paul's, just ask any scholar. Most of them are, but not all of them. But they're all Pauline in content, and they're an important part of the New Testament, the bulk of the New Testament, actually, next to the Gospels. I think he came to the wrong place, Matter. And then, of course, Revelation, the wacko John of Patmos in the end, gigantic whores in the sky, yeah, and stuff like that. Howard would love it. But it's the last book, and it's really not a scholarly book. But anyway, the Gospels, because they come before the Acts of the Apostles in the Bible, and because people have this idea, a lot of people have the idea that the Gospels were written and then Paul, who was Paul by then, wrote his letters to the churches that he was establishing and built on the Gospels. Not so. Paul's letter to the Romans, as some of you know, was written in 15 years before Mark, who was the earliest, 20 years before Matthew, at least 20 years before Matthew, maybe even 30 years before Luke and wrote his gospel, and the Acts of the Apostles, and 75 years before John's gospel, whoever John was. So my point is a simple one, and it's just to remind those of you who knew, and that's that the whole business begins with the letters to the Romans, letter to the Romans and letter to the Corinthians, which is why I gave them to you. Written in 50, and I think Corinthians 53, 54, anyone know? Anyone got it at hand? But soon thereafter. And we're going to talk about them. But before I do, and before I ask you guys to choose a verse or tell us which verse you chose and use those as entryways into the writings, I'd like to tell you about this man. He was born in Tarsus. Right here. Southern Turkey, which is why we have Turkish wine and Turkish beer on the table tonight. Yeah. I mean, for Emily Dickinson, we had New England clam chowder. Yeah. For the talk about Vietnam, we had Vietnamese soup pho. And Holly suggested that tonight we have wafers and wine. But Matter didn't go for it, so we have at least Turkish beer. Tarsus, in those days, this world has always been in turmoil, as you know. Still is in turmoil. It's awful. But one of the things about Tarsus, a couple of things about Tarsus that are important. Not only just because Saul was born there, Antony and Cleopatra met there. They got it on in Tarsus. Supposedly. But look at where it is. Here's the eastern trade route, headed for Greece and Rome, right through Tarsus. And so people like this guy, Saul, his dad was a Jew. He was a Roman citizen, which is saying something. That is definitely saying something in those days. It was very expensive to become a Roman citizen, and a very good idea because, as Paul finds out before his demise, it saved his life that he was one. And it's transferable. Like if you belong to USAA, it goes to your family. He was a Roman citizen. His parents were well-educated people. They were practicing Jews. They were not in exile, but they longed for Jerusalem. And you know, who doesn't? But so finally, when Paul was in his early years, no one knows he was born in the year 5, we think. All this stuff is, we think. Almost all of it's we think. Born in 5, and so he's 8 years old, younger than Jesus. And his parents were very successful merchants. And this is important for a couple of reasons. One, he was living in a place where people from all over the world were traveling through and stopping. The common language among the upper classes, the merchant classes, the trading classes, the artisan classes, and the very wealthy, the language was Greek. Common Greek. It's called Koine. Does anyone know how to pronounce that? It is?
Well,
it sounds like it.
Is an organization in town.
There you go. Did you hear that? Coin makes perfect sense. I think, from what I've read, I think it was a kind of a lingua franca in Greek that Jesus would have known if his dad really was a carpenter, for instance, that anyone in any trade would have known. Buddhist monks were walking through Tarsus, bringing the 500-year-old religion from the East. And they weren't proselytizing at the time, we're told, but he would have been exposed to them. His dad was a tent maker, which meant that he bought leather and tanned it, which is taboo for conservative Jews at the time because it's touching dead flesh. But nevertheless, Saul became one as well. And then his family moved to Jerusalem. Oh, before I leave Tarsus, every year in Tarsus, in those days, all these different cities, and none of them are really showing on here, they're important ones, but a lot of these different cities, no, none of them are. They had their own gods. Hercules was the local god at Tarsus. And Saul would have seen every year, at the end of the long, hot, dry summer, Saul would have seen this gigantic procession that went through the city towns, through the town and the city itself, the adjoining towns and the city. It was a huge statue of Hercules, who was their god of fertility and their god of all kinds of cool stuff. They brought him to this place outside town and they lighted him on fire, and he died in the fire. In the spring, he was resurrected, as was the land. And so what young Saul saw was a god, as there were many, many gods who died and came back from death. And Heracles even harrowed hell in their version of it. So for those of you who know the New Testament and know the Gospels, there are residences there that are pretty strong. So he goes to Jerusalem. His family does, next year in Jerusalem, and settled in, and they are doing quite well as Roman citizens, And Paul started studying, when he was 10 years old, we think, started studying with the Pharisees. Now, what does that mean? That means a lot. Does anyone know? Anyone want to say something? Well, then I'll do it. The Pharisees, there were 3 basic sects or groups of Jews around the time of Jesus. One were the Sadducees, who were the priests who ran the temple. They were all about priesthood, all about liturgy, all about maintaining the priestly quo, if that is a thing. And there were reputedly 70 of them. Sometimes people say 60 of them. It doesn't matter. If you've seen any of the films about this era, then you see them depicted as these really kind of outlandishly costumed people. But they were serious priests. They served the temple, and that's important. The Pharisees were the beginning of the rabbinic tradition. And by rabbinic tradition, I mean really generally, but quite honestly and almost thoroughly. The rabbinic tradition began with a rabbi named Hillel. I know that every one of you in this room has at least heard his name. He was 1, 2, 3 generations. Am I right about this? 3 generations before Paul? Yes, he would have been. Okay. And Hillel's grandson, Gamaliel II, the second, was Paul's teacher. Paul studied under Gamaliel. He calls himself, what is it? Philippians 3:5. Go for it. Somebody find it. He describes himself at this time. Let me make sure I got that right. Yeah, Philippians 3:5. He describes himself to the people of Philippi, to the Jews especially.
Gamaliel does or Paul does?
Paul does. 3:5. Actually, it starts at 4. Thank you.
For it is we who are the circumcision, who worship in the Spirit of God and boast in Christ Jesus, have no confidence in the flesh, even though I too have risen for confidence in the flesh.
Now slow down.
Okay. If anyone else has reason to be confident in the flesh, I have more, circumcised on the 8th day, a member of the people of Israel, the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew born of Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church, as to righteousness under the law, blameless.
Thank you. Yeah. So he defines himself clearly. He's a Benjaminite. He's a Jew. He was born a Jew. He was raised a Jew. He was trained as a Jew. He was trained in rhetoric with the Pharisees, in rhetoric, in religion, and in the rabbinic tradition. And I learned in Israel on a bus one day what the rabbinic tradition sounds like even now. There were 2 guys, there was one in the seat in front of me and one in the seat next to me, arguing the whole time. The whole time. And I finally said to this one guy who could speak English, the guy in the front seat, I said, so what's going on here? And he said, hey, 2 Jews, 3 arguments. And I said, oh, okay, fine. Yeah. And he said, it's called pill pool, hair splitting. And what they're doing in the rabbinic and the Pharisaic tradition is keeping their religion alive by challenging it every step of the way. And that's what Paul studied. Read about Gamaliel. Here's the situation. I'm in Acts 5:34 now. Stacy, Acts 5:34, please.
Okay, got it.
Here's the situation. Peter and I think John, I should have looked it up, have been put in prison, and because they're rabble rousing. And what they're doing, what these guys are doing, these are the early Christians. They're not Christians. They don't call themselves Christians. Paul never called himself a Christian. Jesus certainly never called himself a Christian. But these are people of the way. They're called Ebionites or Petrine, people of the Petrine, meaning Peter, his way of thinking. And they've been challenged by the local guys, and so they're brought before the Pharisees, the reigning Pharisees in town. I forget what town this is. The most famous of the Pharisees, Gamaliel, is asked to comment on this. He was the head of the whatever the group was called at that place. He's asked to comment on these guys who were rabble rousing in the name of a Messiah who has already come, but who died. What kind of a Messiah is this Messiah who comes and dies on a nailed to a stick? Come on, seriously. Gamaliel says, hey, listen to this.
34.
I think so.
But a Pharisee in the council named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, respected by all the people, stood up and ordered the men to be put outside for a short time.
Keep going.
Then
Please.
he said to them, fellow Israelites, consider carefully what you propose to do to these men. For some time ago, Judas rose up, claiming to be somebody, and a number of men, about 400, joined him. But he was killed, and all who followed him were dispersed and disappeared.
Keep going.
After him, Judas the Galilean rose up at the time of the census and got people to follow him. He also perished, and all who followed him were scattered. So in the present case, I tell you, keep away from these men and let them alone, because if this plan or this undertaking is of human origin, it will fail. But if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them. In that case, you may even be found fighting against God.
There, yeah. And there's wisdom that makes Solomon look like a schoolboy, I think. So here's Saul's situation at the time. The names are interchangeable, by the way. When he was, he served the temple in Jerusalem. He studied under Gamaliel. He was a Pharisee. He was also, part of the job was to be a temple guard and to guard the confines of the temple, protect the temple from Gentiles especially. And it came to him, it occurred to him that this new group, these followers of this Jesus, there were 11 of them at the time, were getting more and more dangerous, and they were causing more and more trouble, and they were causing people to not only challenge the status quo of Judaism, but also to really piss off the Romans, which you didn't want to do, all right? You didn't want to piss off the Romans, because there are billions of them, and they all have AK-47s, and they're all over the place. So Saul energetically joined the persecution teams of these people. And he mentions it many times in the letters, and Luke mentions it many times in Acts, but in the 7th chapter, 758 of Acts, anybody? Anna?
Right.
758. This is the stoning of St. Stephen. This is not Bob Dylan's kind of stone. This is stoning for punishment for what?
So, starting at 57.
Blasphemy, yes, I heard it, thank you.
At this, they covered their ears and, yelling at the top of their voices, they all rushed to him, dragged him out of the city, and began to stone him. Meanwhile, the witnesses laid their clothes at the feet of a young man named Saul.
Yeah, Saul was in charge of the stoning of Stephen. Saul very well could have been at the crucifixion. He very well could have been. He was in the temple at the time, in the temple confines at the time, and he was a zealous persecutor of these people who we believe were threatening Judaism. And then,
Give me a timeline here.
29.
Okay.
29, no, not
So it's
29, I'm sorry.
when-
Jesus was crucified in 32, so this is 35, 36, around there.
Okay. And then it says here that he wrote when it was 54 C in
Yeah.
Corinthians.
54 for Corinthians?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah. And Romans was 50. But anyway, back to the scene. There was a city called Damascus, and there still is. And it's probably in worse shape now than it was then. And I'm sorry to say, because anyway, he was on the road to Damascus, and you all know this story. I know you do. On his way to persecute these people, not Christians. All right, they weren't called Christians. It wasn't until Rome under Nero, which would be 8-10 years from now, that the word Christus, which is a perversion of Christus, which means Messiah, chosen one, anointed one. Jesus wasn't called the Messiah, the anointed one, or the Christus until much after his death. As a matter of fact, he denies that he was in Matthew. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Matthew. Anyway, Paul is on his way. You want to put us up there with the verse? Here we go. Yeah. There are 3 times in the letters, not including mention in Acts, that Paul talks about his conversion on the road to Damascus. Technically, if you're a scholar and not a religious person, you don't call it the conversion because he wasn't converting to nothing. He wasn't. It's an apocalypse. An apocalypse means a revelation, God's revelation, true revelation of himself. Or it was a religious ecstatic experience. Yes, ma'am. Claude.
Can you say it?
You can say epiphany. I'm going to give you a couple of other options as we go through here. But you want to read it, Claudia? Would you? Can you read it
This
from there?
is King James. Oh, this one up here.
Yeah. The King James is funnier. But go ahead.
Thus I journeyed to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priests. At midday, O king,
He's talking to King Agrippa, and he's being brought before him. He's about to tell Agrippa that you can't kill me, I'm a Roman citizen. I appeal to Caesar, which is what sends him to Rome. Sorry.
At midday, O king, I saw on the way a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shining around me and those who journeyed with me. And when we had all fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying to me in the Hebrew language, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? It hurts you to kick against the goads. And I said, Who are you, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting.
Excellent. Thank you. Kick against the goads in the King James Version is kick against the pricks, which in Bible class evokes titters from the back of the room. Kicking at the yeah. Here's the reference there. This is a quote from a Dionysian. What would the word be? A Dionysian caveat or warning. If you're plowing with an ox, you have an ox goad, okay? A prick. At the end of the ox goad, a long stick, is a sharpened bronze point. You want the ox to turn right, you tap him on his right flank, and he'll turn right, unless he's a pain in the ass. If he's a pain in the ass, he turns left, and so you poke him with your goad or your prick or whatever. You know, the kids. Yeah, you can laugh. You poke him with that. What Jesus is saying to Paul here, what Paul hears here, is that you're turning the wrong way, and it's hurting you more and more every time you do it. It's that simple. And again, he's quoting Dionysus, who we know from Tarsus, but it could be Luke. Anyway, yeah. Claudia, we want to finish? This is Jesus.
But rise and stand upon your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you to serve and bear witness to the things in which you have seen me, and to those in which I will appear to you, delivering you from the people and from the Gentiles, to whom I send you, to open their eyes, that they may turn from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me.
Absolutely great. Yeah. This is the longest version of his description of the conversion. I'm going to call it conversion because it's common usage. Excuse me. Several thousand paintings have been done of this. I chose 2 from 2 different extremes, I think. The first was Peter Bruegel, the elder. This is the conversion on the road. Can you see, Paul? Yeah, no, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there he is. Bruegel was a mannerist. I just learned this. And the mannerist's job was, and you look at all of Bruegel's paintings, one of my favorite painters. Mannerist's job is to draw you into the central subject or object. In this case, it's Paul, soon to be Saul. He's going to take his Hebrew name after this. But there you have a busyness here that almost belittles the experience. And to me, makes it more personal in a lot of ways. I mean, there he is, everybody's just going on about their business. You know?
Is he lying on the ground?
Yeah, he's lying on the ground, he got thrown from his horse. Here's my favorite part of this painting, and I probably should portray this. See this guy right here? The little boy in man's armor. Can you see him? He's hunched over like this in a huge helmet, reminiscent, of course, of David when Saul gave him his armor and said, "Go fight Goliath," and he said, "I don't need armor." But I thought Bruegel was one extreme. The next extreme is Caravaggio, who did two paintings of this experience. This one, I went to a thing that the curator of the art museum did at St. Paul's. It really was St. Paul's, a long time ago, and he did an entire class on this painting. It was fascinating. I can't remember any of it, but what I do remember is the power of the light and whatever struck him. And as you can see, he struck blind as he was for 3 days until he got to Ananias. But he's unhorsed by this experience. And so there's no doubt in my mind, at least, that Paul had a gigantic experience on the road to Damascus. The voice of Jesus, the bright light that blinded him, could have been an extra. You can do the lights, Matt. It could have been thanks, Jamie. It could have been a religious ecstasy. It could have been anything. Not anything. It couldn't have been anything. But it was a huge thing. And if you're a Christian or if you're a historian, a cultural historian, it changed the world. It really did. Think of Europe, the cathedrals, the paintings. Think of Europe, I mean, this guy, a little guy going out to kill these people, fell down. Now, I found this when I was researching Dickinson. Listen to this. This is in reference to Dostoevsky, who was an epileptic. Maybe Dickinson was, and maybe she wasn't. Maybe he was, and maybe he wasn't. Some epileptic seizures are blissful. Understanding why might shed light on religious awakenings, joy, and the sense of self. It was one of the most profound experiences in Dostoevsky's life. Quote, "A happiness unthinkable in the normal state and unimaginable for anyone who hasn't experienced it. I am then in perfect harmony with myself and the entire universe," he told his friend, Russian philosopher Nikolai Stakov. What lay behind such feelings? The description might suggest a religious awakening, but Dostoevsky was instead describing the moments just before a full-blown epileptic seizure. These sensations seem to have informed the character of Prince Mishkin in Dostoevsky's novel, The Idiot. Anyone ever read that? Really, I really didn't like it. Flannery O'Connor, remember her? She was at home, sick with lupus, and her mom, who was a traditional Southern lady, walked by her, and Flannery was reading this book, and The Idiot, and her mom looked over her shoulder and said, "You're reading the book called The Idiot? I mean, really?" Anyway, that was a footnote. Quote, "I would give my whole life for this one instant," the prince says of the brief moment at the start of his epileptic fit, a moment, quote, "overflowing with unbounded joy and rapture, ecstatic devotion, and completest enthusiasm." Yeah. So I'm not professing that this was an epileptic seizure, but I don't think it's impossible. And that word, enthusiasm, is pretty cool. And filled with theos, God. And it's a description of the state that this guy experienced. From the apocalypse, as you know, or you may not know, after the apocalypse, he went to Damascus, stayed with a dude named Ananias. The scales fell off his eyes. He could see again after 3 days. 3 days, you know? Oh, yeah. And then he was, because he was threatened, lowered off over the wall, out the window and over the wall in a basket, and escaped into Arabia. Disappeared for 15 years. Showed up again in Antioch. Yes, it was in Antioch. And his whole missionary journey cycle began in around 50. When he was probably mid-40s, he was, by that time, thoroughly convinced that all I know is Christ Jesus and him crucified. That's what he said. That's all I know. And if you read all your assigned reading, the last few verses will tell you everything you need to know about Paul's devotion to the risen Christ. But for Paul, this was everything, and everyone should hear it. His missionary journeys followed a really simple pattern. He'd go to a new city, new town, usually a city, go first to the synagogue. It was customary in those days that after the synagogue service, visitors were invited to stand up, say, I'm from Cleveland, you know, we got some cool synagogues there, you guys haven't seen shit, anything, and then would be invited to converse. Paul usually overdid it in the synagogues. You know, you guys are dying, you have no idea what you're talking about. You know, where's Jesus at? You know, where are the 14 stations of the cross on your walls? You know, that kind of thing. I'm making that, that's a joke. And so he was usually rushed out, given the bum rush from the synagogue because he was obnoxious. He was a bandy-legged little guy and not a very pleasant little fellow. More often than not, beaten and stoned and whipped. And then he would go to the Gentiles. And here's where Tarsus and his Greek and his Pharisaic training came in. He could talk to these Gentiles. And he could tell them, no, Peter's wrong. You don't have to be circumcised in order to follow Jesus. You don't have to follow the dietary laws. And he makes this huge argument that some of you read in Romans. With Adam, we all inherited sin. With Jesus, we all inherit the possibility of redemption. Abraham gave us the law, but, the Jews gave us the law. Sinai gave us the law. I'm sorry, my mistake. Mount Sinai, Moses gave us the law. And then he gives you the Abraham case. Abraham was judged righteous by God because of his faith. Abraham lived 1,000 years before the law was given. Well, a lot of years before the law was given. And so Paul's argument is the law is good, it's fine, but you got to work against it in order to be righteous. It's all about faith. You're not justified by following the law. Justified means acquitted. You're not acquitted of your sin by following the law. You're acquitted of your sin by faith. Yeah. And so that's his basic argument. Do you want to take a couple minutes break and then do some verses, or just do some verses? Let's do some verses. And if you want to get up, go and get something. Stacy, you haven't gotten anything yet.
No, I have to go to the bathroom.
Okay, when Stacy gets back to the bathroom, we start again. No. Some people want to get something to eat. Yeah, please.
So, the Testament and the Covenant, it says the thing about the moil. The thing about the moil, the circumcision, the mila is the cut.
Another Caravaggio.
Yeah. I got a report on that.
So, hey, folks, let's do this. Let's have a volunteer give us a verse. And the parameters were Romans 4-8, yeah? And Corinthians 12-15. Thank you. Yeah. Anyone?
You want some humor?
Oh.
Me?
Yeah, please.
Romans 6, starting with
Can you put it up,
verse 14.
Romans 6:14, is that what you said, Hal?
6:14, it's called the inner conflict. They sort of got the subtitle of the, at least in the last name.
Would you read, please?
Yeah. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am of the flesh, sold into slavery under sin. I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Now, if I do what I do not want, I agree that the law is good. But in fact, it is no longer I that do it, but sin that dwells within me. For I know that nothing good dwells within me, that is in my flesh. I can will what is right, but I cannot do it. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. Now if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I that do it, but sin that dwells within me. So actually it makes more sense having read it out loud, but when I first read it, I was...
No, he's difficult, like you said, he's difficult, and Holly was reading the other night and said, you know, who understands this stuff?
I know.
And I said, nobody.
Okay.
No, I mean, there are people who claim to understand it. There are people who claim to understand Dickinson, remember that? I mean, really? I mean, you read some of these Dickinson poems, but in this case, does anyone want to comment on that? He's talking about sin. Paul is obsessed with sin. Obsessed with it. In part because everywhere he goes and everywhere he looks, there is behavior that you and I mean, makes Game of Thrones look like Pride and Prejudice. I mean, it's just unbelievable stuff that was going on. And all in the name of gods, and all in the name of people who could, did you get it?
I think so, yeah.
There you go, man, yeah. All in the name of people who were, there were these people all throughout this world at that time, walking from town to town, standing on street corners, performing miracles, making what you call prophecies that were supposed to come true in the next hour or so, and all that kind of stuff. They were called magicians, but the ancient word for them was magi. They were wise men, but in those days, wise men meant people who could call up the dead, who could do all sorts of things, who could heal the sick, who could do anything in the name of their God. This guy named Apollonius, he tells some story. I mean, some of the stuff this guy did, he levitates people, and he makes them We makes them walk across lakes and stuff, above the lake, and all this stuff. People believed it, and people believed that you could do anything. The Dionysians believed that you could do anything you wanted to anybody you wanted, as long as it felt good. There was sin everywhere, and Paul was scared to death of it. The wages of sin is death. Yeah. And to him, that's what the whole thing is all about. The way, what we get paid for sinning is death, unless you have faith in the risen Christ.
And the world's going to end.
The world's going to end next week.
So
that's a really important thing.
That's the whole.
It's coming. I mean, the apocalypse is on its way. Yeah.
Where did he get this from? Is this his own thinking, or is he saying that Jesus?
Wicked good question. A.N. Wilson, the guy who I just reread and enjoyed immensely, and highly recommend, says
Jesus,
that
which book is that? Jesus.
no, Wilson did Jesus, Tolstoy, C.S. Lewis, and Paul.
But is it called Jesus in Pilgrimage? That's the name of the new.
This is Paul.
Oh.
Yeah. Wilson says that, or you could fall back on this ancient Jewish idea of Yetzer, which means the conflict of righteousness or self-consciousness against evil within us, evil temptations and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of what you get when you're reading about Paul in Acts especially is Luke's and Paul's problems with this whole conflict. Paul's at war with Peter right now. Not literally at war, but Paul and Peter are really up against one another here. Paul's taken their religion, or the way it was called in those days, to the Gentiles. And Peter says, no, you can't do that. You got to stay with the Jews. You can't be one of these followers of Jesus unless you're a Jew. Paul's saying, look, there's so much sin all around us. I'm inclined to sin. This is part of his law, anti-law argument. The law can tell us what sin is, what the punishment for it is, but it can't preclude it. It can't stop it. It can't make my inclination stop. And so you get this conflict in him. And yes.
Wasn't the conversion experience that Paul had, it sounds as if a piece of the message was that he was to bring the way to the Gentiles. So in a sense, that was some kind of like mystical message or something.
Good, very well done.
It seems like,
especially right after the conversion.
right, so in which case, his force of argument from his perspective is supported by Jesus.
I think so.
From his
I think so, and I think, and this is just me now, okay, this is not academic or scholarly, but I think that there's got to be a measure of self-examination going on inside this guy. I mean, he was a temple guard, he was a Pharisee, he was a pious Jew. I mean, he was among the most pious of Jews. And now all of a sudden he's turning against them. And there's a conflict within this guy that I don't think was ever resolved, but we'll never know. Okay.
What is he offering to those who chose to be sinners? Because if they died, when they died, like, 6:23, the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Jesus Christ our Lord. How is he going to discourage sinners if in the end you're still with the Lord?
I'm not sure I understood.
How do you discourage sin in life, in the living life, if whenever anyone dies, they're with the Lord?
Oh, no, yeah, this is a big problem in the early church, and all the way up to Dostoevsky, Brothers Karamazov. You remember it? Alyosha, was he the? Alyosha was this guy, and somebody said to him, "Look, if God forgives me for my sins, okay, thank you. Let's go sin. WTF? Let's go. And Alyosha said, "No, I don't understand." Who was it? So senior who was rotting, right? That's been a problem all along. It gave rise to, what was it called when you could buy? Indulgences. Yeah, that whole thing. Yeah. I don't think it was ever resolved, but he says in one of those two readings, I think, but I read the whole book, so I don't remember for sure. But he says that when the time comes, and like Leanne said, it's coming, man. I mean, it's coming Saturday, or it's coming right before, I don't know, but it's coming very soon in our lifetime. When it comes, those who have accepted, those alive who have accepted Christ, who are justified by faith, will go to heaven with him when he rises. So will the dead will be resuscitated, resurrected.
Is the concept of purgatory biblical or literary?
No, Catholic. Yeah. Totally Roman Catholic.
That's a word I have to look up. Eschatological.
Eschatological, yeah. Eschatology is the coming of the end of things. And at the time of Jesus and of Paul, the eschatological expectations of the Jews were varied hugely. There were those like Judas Iscariot who thought there's going to be a huge war, an Armageddon. We're going to kill all the Romans, all the Gentiles. Everything's going to be great. The Messiah is going to come. We're all going to go into Jewish paradise, or whatever it was. There were those who said, no, the Messiah's got to be suffering servant. And this is the role Jesus took. It was a sign later on. The eschatology was rampant. Everybody pretty much expected it then, and it came. Yeah. In the year 70, when the Tiberius destroyed Jerusalem. I think it was. Yeah. Jerusalem was leveled, everyone was killed. It came. They powered before he came. He's cute.
Being Jewish, I've only recently started reading some of the New Testament. And I read the first four Gospels. And I find this false Paul, I read it like 4 or 5 times, it's much darker. I mean, that's how, he's really obsessed with, the kind of one between sin and how to live, and then goes back to sin. It's really different. Don't they call the first four Gospels like the happy days or something?
Gospel means good news.
Yeah, good news. Okay.
And it's to him, this world, it's almost Zoroastrian, which is a religion at this time, which pitted, and Gnosticism, which Jesus could very well have been aligned with, pitted the flesh against the spirit. And Paul's basically aligning with that. The flesh is bad and the spirit is good, and we got to shed the flesh. I don't think I would like the guy.
You're not going to realize this is in one sentence. He goes in Romans 7, sentence 7 goes, what follows? Is the law identical with sin? Of course not. But except through law, I should never have been acquainted with sin. That's really some pretty wild stuff.
Yeah, he says that a lot. And he blames the law for sin in some cases. Like Holly and I and Ian Wilson were saying the other night, and I think anybody who claims to understand this guy completely is it's 2,000 years ago. But boy, he sure made a difference. Stacy, what do you want to say?
Do you consider Paul to be inspired, or all this thinking to be a result of his own psychology and psychological conflicts, or a result of the environment, or combination?
I'd go for combination, really would. And that is, I'm not a religious person, so if you're going to say, my dog tag said religion, none. N-O-N-E, not and so the inspiration, the inspiration part I don't know about, but I think his environment at times has so much to do with what he was saying, what he felt, what he believed. But he in Romans and Corinthians and Galatians, he created Christianity. And the gospelers picked it up and stirred in all the myths, about healing of the paralytic and all that great stuff. And then John got a hold of it and turned it into Christian theology. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and Jesus was the God made flesh. he starts from there.
But it obviously, whatever
really
the cause of
like
it,
that.
it fit with a lot of people.
Say it again.
Whatever the cause of this thinking or this religion, it fit with a lot of people at the time and for times onward. I mean, it fit. So people had the same conflicts that Paul had. I would think.
I think so too. And I think it's really interesting, and someone, I think Leanne mentioned, again, how we were talking about it. If it weren't for wealthy women, this church never would have gotten off the ground. Never. And they were tradespeople, they were wealthy, they were influential, and he must have been.
Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, you don't have much nice to say about women.
I was just saying.
Yeah, correct.
See, why is it church? Why do they have,
Because no, there's another one of the quiet church wear a veil.
Yeah,
And look at
but give me your money.
look at 1 Corinthians 11:1. Somebody, on the subject of women. Yeah, there are contradictions all over the place. But again, it's later writers I think are having a lot to do with this. They really do. I don't think that the Christian church would have been monastic and celibate if they had followed Paul. Part of the be quiet in church comes from Judaism, from separating the men and the women in church. And you don't. The women don't go sit in anybody's lap during the service. And so Paul's a Jew, don't forget. Born a Jew, died a Jew. And he's just saying that there's something that's happened. And everybody could get on with it, and it caught on. It did. And I think the environment had a lot to do with it. And I think a huge expectation of the coming of the end. The Gospels have to deal with that. Because Jesus says in Matthew, and I think in Mark as well, before this generation is gone, I will return. Yeah. Doesn't he say that in Matthew? Yeah. And everybody, the generation's gone, everybody's walking around and go, JC, come on, let's go. There's the Romans, make everybody happy. The response to that is he returns in the church, with the church, as the church. And never does.
The fact that he caught on, I mean, part of that was because they've been waiting for the Messiah really,
Absolutely. Like Stacy said, it was an environment. And they wanted to believe it. And it was a desperate time. But hey.
The persecutions were everywhere.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't just the
well, without the persecution, the religion might not have made it. You gotta have persecution. You gotta have more. It's a sad thing, but it's a true thing.
But he was such a great salesman. He's like, I am whatever you want me to be. I will be like you to serve you and reach you, and I will be like you to serve you and reach you. And so I think that this thing about the women here, he needs to not tick off these Jews. So he says, these women have to be quiet. But then later on he says, the women will prophesy and pray in the temple. So he kind of contradicts himself there.
Yes, and I think he struggled with it all his life, or all his writing life. I mean, the later letters, and I'm pretty sure about this, I didn't review it, but the later letters pretty much ignore this whole thing, this whole homosexual thing, this whole, all those things, and they go right to theology. And I think look what he did. I mean, he didn't do it by guile. He didn't do it by lying. He didn't do it. I think, and this is my take, okay, this is not a scholarly take. I think that he was so convinced and so filled with Christ that everybody responded to him. Said, wow.
But every one of them the disciples.
The early
better. I mean, most of them were crucified.
Well, yeah.
That wouldn't have been much fun.
No, really. I mean, Peter says, do it
Upside down.
Upside down, yeah. What?
Personality-wise, Jesus was so different from Paul. I mean, when I never studied Paul, I have to say, the first time
heard various experts and stuff, but I mean, Jesus comes over as such a gentle, good person, and he doesn't focus so much on the sin and, suffering and drama and what have you. I mean, he really has a message of peace and love and tolerance for people and, for tolerance of people who have sinned, Mary Magdalene and what have you. So Paul comes over as, we're not sure she's
She might have been.
She was
These are also written by human beings.
Well, this is it. I mean, I have to say, there's whoever took off from Paul, I mean, Paul would be an incredible marketeer guy in modern society. I mean, what the Catholic Church built, the wealth that they built, and the power that they built. I mean, they were a kingdom, they were up there with all their, European kings and princes and what have you, through, I mean, the longest surviving is probably.
But you know who Pope Francis reminds me of? Have you ever heard what Benjamin Franklin said about Christianity? He said it's gone really, really wildly off the mark. He said, and the guy he was talking to, I forget who it was, said, so what do you suggest? And he said, emulate Jesus.
And that's what Francis is doing.
You know what I found interesting just reading about the law all the time. And I'm not sure, but it seems to me that on some level Paul was saying there's a faith that's deeper than the law or bigger than the law. And so, before Abraham was circumcised, they were living through faith. And circumcision was a mark of faith. And then that became the law, which could be quite burdensome. And the law was sort of like old dead tree in some ways. And then you have, Jesus and liberation and all of that, but then not too long after we're bound down with law again.
Oh, no.
So that's that dynamic of
The law didn't equate to righteousness.
right.
Well, to some people it did. I mean, there are people now here in Cleveland, not in this room. People now say if you obey the law, no matter what the law is, you're fine. That kind of thing. I think for Paul, and I think I already said this, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating this all. I think for Paul, everything changed. When Jesus rose from the dead, everything changed.
So, can I give you my quote?
Yes!
Okay, so,
March
you're
from the
saying
Bible.
that everything, when you're saying that everything changed with Jesus, he says, this is Romans 5:3. We rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they are good for us. They help us to learn to be patient. Patience develops strength of character in us and helps us trust God more each time we use it. Until finally our hope and faith are strong and steady. This is my faith. And then, when that happens, we are able to hold our heads high no matter what happens, and know that all is well. For we know how dearly God loves us. And we feel this warm love everywhere within us, because God has given us the Holy Spirit to fill our hearts with love.
Well, 1 Corinthians
I mean,
13,
that's not the message that's coming out of the Old Testament. That's the beginning of the God is love version.
That's where 1 Corinthians 13 comes from. And, that Jesus suffered, what does Luther call it? The gospel in miniature. God so loved mankind that he offered his only son so that they may be forgiven. Here it is, the entire gospel. And it's the love is the key word there. It's the love from God for man that moves Paul. It really is. We're getting close to it. We are at the end.
I had the exact same quote that you did. But one of the things that I learned in Peter's Bible class was when you have different Bibles speak to you and use different wording and all that. So I have another. But mine, it's interesting that yours spoke to you in your way and mine spoke to me. It was exactly the same thing. Not only that, but we also boast in our sufferings, knowing that our sufferings produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not disappoint us because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. So it's the same thing, but the wording is a little bit different, and it still has the same connotations.
Yes, and in many cases, the different wording is crucial, absolutely crucial. Isaiah 7:13, okay? So the king's up on the wall, and he's looking out at the bad guys, I forget who they are, ISIS or something like that. And he tries burning his son alive on the ramparts, hoping that won't press him. Isaiah comes up to him and he said, look, a young woman is going to give birth to a child, and when that happens, everything's going to be okay. The original is in the Aramaic, and it's Betula, which means young woman. And that was translated into the Hebrew, and the word in Hebrew, I should have looked at my notes, because the word in Hebrew is Alma, I think, means young woman. And that got translated into the Latin, and the closest they could come to it was Virgo. And then that got translated into the German, and the closest they could come to Virgo was Fräulein, young unmarried woman. And then that got translated into, it became an article of faith because of the simple impossibility to translate Betula into.
But following that, 13:13, 1 Corinthians, faith, hope, charity. Why do different churches pick up the different words to emphasize?
They don't know. The charity one is tzedakah. Any Jews in the audience? Tzedakah is the highest form of love. It's giving to other people without them knowing who's giving. Am I getting this right? Without them, it's caritas is the Latin for the Greek, I think, for charity also, and it means it's a gift from God to be able to do something like this. But the love he's talking about is out of pay.
And some will say hope. I mean,
Yeah, hope. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know, but yeah. Well, thanks,
Matthew
folks.
Fox's concept of original blessing is a little more appealing than Paul's with the whole original thing.
Yeah, no, he's a Pharisee. You gotta remember that too. Well, thanks, good audience. Thanks, folks, very much. And I really like you to do your homework. So cool.
so when you give us a few days rather than the night before.
Oh, no, I gave you a week. Oh, I see. Okay.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. 2 weeks. I'll have the homework for the next week.
Yeah.
Buddy, I'm careful driving.